Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing a really awesome guest today who is helping to create a better tomorrow for all of us on some really unique technological fronts. Today on the show, we have the honor of being joined by Alex Haro, who is the co-founder, Chief Executive Officer, and Executive Chairman of Hubble Network, which is a startup that is building the world's first global satellite network capable of communicating directly with standard Bluetooth devices, ultimately looking to enable connectivity anywhere on the planet, even if you don't have cellular coverage, if you don't have Wi-Fi, ultimately creating this, as they say, the satellite-enabled Internet of Things platform. Alex, is also the co-founder of Life 360, which is the information technology company that provides location-based services, including sharing notifications to consumers globally, and served on the company's board of directors since 2010, and previously held several key leadership roles there, including as their chief technology officer and president. There he helped scale their company's platform from startup to a really global category leader. Prior to Life 360, he worked at Orbited, which is an open source project enabling real-time browser communications. Alex studied community science, Pomona College and Harvey Mudd College, and a lot of really cool topics to get into today that we don't normally touch on, but very excited to have him. Alex Haro, thank you so much for taking time on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, it's really awesome. I'm really looking forward to getting to a lot of these themes. Before we touch on Hubble at all, would love to hand things to you as we typically do, just to learn a little bit more about you. Would love to hear about sort of the early days of setting up Life 360. My father-in-law was a major fan of the tile product and had millions of them all over his house and in the workspace. But take us back a little bit, Alex, and further introduce yourself, because it's a really cool story on its own.
Thank you. Yeah, you did pretty good, but I'll try to dive in a little bit deeper on my background. As you mentioned, started off as a computer scientist, really focused on what I can enable computers to do, and really a lot of software engineering. And left school in 2008 to start my first company called Life 360. And the initial inspiration for Life 360 was actually Hurricane Katrina. During that natural disaster, there was a lot of families that got displaced. People didn't know where to find their family members. They didn't know where to spend the night. They often got separated and, stuck in different places.
Mm-hmm.
And the response to that tragedy from, the government was ready.gov, which you could print out emergency contact information and put that on your refrigerator door. And Chris, my co-founder, and I thought there should be a better way to actually help families stay safe during natural disasters. And then in about 2008, iPhone had launched, Google had just announced Android. And so we saw this Android platform as something with always on connectivity, GPS always on as well. That could actually be a way to help families keep safe and secure. So that was actually kind of the initial inspiration for Life 360. Chris and I got very excited to use this new platform to help families stay safe and secure, and kicked Life 360 off actually by winning a competition that Google put on to generate buzz for Android. So our first source of funding there was a grant from Google for winning a competition. And things kind of just kept rolling from there, very much focused on how do we leverage smartphones to make everyday family life better. Obviously, we were initially inspired to help during natural disasters, but quickly realized that we needed to focus in on what are the daily frustrations around knowing where's my most important family members and the most important things. And that's really what allowed Life 360 to grow.
Mhm.
Certainly, the early years, we were very, very early in the days of mobile. I still remember a lot of investors and naysayers saying there's no way families will all have smartphones. And obviously, that prediction was very, very wrong. But we just saw the future of smartphones and everyone kind of having this always connected platform be a major part of their life. And
Mhm.
that's definitely the way we rode at Life 360. The first 4 or 5 years, the growth was relatively slow, and then about in 2012, things kind of tipped, and the pretty much every Christmas, people were handing down their smartphones so that they could then go buy the latest and greatest from either Apple or Google and Samsung. So every Christmas was a huge bump up in traffic for us, and quickly grew to 1 million users, and now we have over 90 million monthly active users that use it on a daily basis, and we're able to take it in about 11 years all the way through an IPO listing. And from a technology standpoint, outside of being able to just really leverage the smartphones, I think one of the things we really focused on was how do we get locations out of these inherently messy sensors that are constantly sort of lying to us, and it's a very messy data set. And if we're trying to show you where your son is on the map, you don't want to hopping all around. You just want to actually know what his real location is. So we invested a lot of our sort of technology and effort into refining that location into the real location point and doing it in a very battery efficient way. And I still think that tech advantage is one of the reasons Life 360 hasn't had any major competitors to date.
Mhm.
And then, sort of tying that into what we're building at Hubble, we saw the opportunity at Life 360 not just for software, smartphone products for our families, but tying in hardware as well. As you mentioned, we acquired Tile so that you can know where your most important things are along with your most important family members. Um, but there was still broader opportunity for hardware for things like knowing where your pets are and creating smart collars for your pets,
Mhm.
or GPS watches for your kids that are too young for smartphones but already running outside and around, or creating fall detectors for elderly parents. There was just a lot of opportunity for these compelling hardware devices at Life 360.
Yep.
And as the chief technology officer, I spent a lot of my time tinkering with hardware, building different hardware devices, testing hundreds of different hardware devices, and all the devices in market were way too bulky, way too expensive, super short battery life. And the primary cause for that was the existing cellular and satellite networks.
Mhm.
They were fundamentally not built for these sorts of use cases of, always on location connectivity. The existing cellular and satellite networks are very heavy weighted towards, voice and text and these heavier protocols. And so you end up with these expensive network services that consume a lot of power and, have issues with coverage and range and all that. So spent a lot of my time as the chief technology officer of Life 360 digging into every possible network out there, everything from the carriers to all the interesting new satellite providers to even some of the more like local area networks like LoRa and some of these other like local gateway
Mhm.
networks. And it's actually how I met my co-founder of Hubble. So at the time I met Ben, I invested in his previous company as a seed investor, and he was building a very interesting completely peer-to-peer mesh network. So you get consumers to put these like Wi-Fi like routers in their homes. He figured out how to get kilometers of range or miles of range away from any one gateway. And then
Mhm.
you build up this kind of completely decentralized peer-to-peer mesh network. Saw a huge opportunity there and got really excited about it, became an investor, and over time, a close friend of Ben's. And eventually, Ben ended up selling that company to Ring Home Security, and then shortly thereafter, Amazon bought Ring.
Yep.
And so at at Amazon, Jeff had the opportunity to pitch Jeff Bezos on this sort of community network. Jeff liked the idea and funded it. And it's actually my co-founder's code and protocol that ended up becoming the Amazon Sidewalk wireless network. And so Ben's the inventor of that network. And Sidewalk is a very interesting network, but it relied on, consumers putting these gateways in their homes, and so they
Right.
ended up really getting distribution just in, city neighborhoods, basically deep urban city neighborhoods. And we saw the opportunity, if you think about, like, say, the pet tracking product that Life 360 wants to eventually bring to market. You don't want to just know where Fido is in the middle of a city, but, like,
Right.
especially for our rural customers, once Fido runs away, you definitely don't want to miss where he's going. And so I continued to harass Ben for several years while he was at Amazon, saying, you can do better. And then about 4 years ago now, I think he got tired of me harassing him, and he showed up to my doorstep and said, hey, what if we could just do Bluetooth to space?
Hmm.
And so I actually have the distinct honor of being the first person to say there's no freaking way. But despite being a bit of an RF crazy genius, he doesn't break any of the laws of physics, and so that's what we got really excited about. Spent the early days validating that we could get the range out of a Bluetooth chip, prove to ourselves, and I'm not sure if your viewers can see the background behind me, but that's from some of our earliest testing with weather balloons, where we were actually able to capture this image using weather balloons and then download it using a Bluetooth chip.
Hmm.
So we were able to convince ourselves that we did it. And before I hop too much into how the technology works, that's kind of what inspired us to start Hubble and get it off the ground about 4 years ago now.
Hmm. No, it's an awesome story, an awesome background success story. But I love the transition into where we're going, and along these themes, as you're mentioning about leveraging these smartphones to make our lives better. Obviously, Bluetooth has done an amazing job of that. For most of us, connecting to our AirPods in our car and so forth. Before we get into sort of the magic that you've developed at Hubble, could you just for a couple of minutes talk a little bit about what the current Bluetooth technology in this device currently does, in the sense it's short range, it's wireless, it's radio waves, and it's low power. And will and that in its own respect does its own magic for what it does today. And then we'll talk about how you might, but just for somebody that might have woken out of a coma from like the late 1990s or something, that's sort of unaware of what Bluetooth is and specifically what it does. Take us into that for a couple minutes, and then we'll go a little further into what Hubble thought about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, when you think about Bluetooth, there's probably two primary things that people think of. The first is, streaming of high fidelity audio from your computer or smartphone to your headphones.
Mm-hmm.
And that definitely has been one of the huge success use cases for Bluetooth. And then I'd say the other is kind of related to what we were talking about, but these like Tile and AirTag like products. And so when you look at what actually Bluetooth is, Bluetooth chips are manufactured by many different manufacturers. And essentially what a Bluetooth chip is it's a semiconductor chip that can create radio waves in the 2.4 gigahertz band, and those radio waves conform to the Bluetooth standard. So Bluetooth as a standard is actually owned by the Bluetooth SIG group, and they have defined these standards of how when you're using Bluetooth to talk to your smartphone to your headphones, here's how it acts. And when you're sort of operating as this beacon device, here's how that acts. And the importance of having that standard is, in theory, it makes Bluetooth ubiquitous. You could use a Bluetooth chip that, your Apple's made for your iPhone, and you can pair it with your Beats headphones. And even though those are technically two different manufacturers, they speak the same standard, and so they can understand each other. And I'm sure a lot of your viewers probably remember the early days of Bluetooth when things really didn't follow the standards that well. and it was really hard to pair devices. The SIG group, I feel like, has done a very good job of, really ensuring that the standards are met and that interoperability is a very big component of that, so that your Android phone can talk to your AirPods and your iPhone can talk to your computer or your uh, car speakers, and being able to have that interoperability is a very big part of what has made Bluetooth so successful. And every smartphone out there has come with Bluetooth, and so looking at why Bluetooth is so ubiquitous, it is kind of the primary way that you communicate cross device. So if you have an Aura ring or you have a smartwatch or your computer, like a lot of these all have Bluetooth chips in them now, so that you can pair them with your smartphone and so that you can communicate through a smartphone app to these hardware devices. And that's really why Bluetooth has become so ubiquitous, because it did focus so heavily on the standards of interoperability, and allow these devices to talk to each other and communicate with each other. And without something like the Bluetooth SIG group making sure that all of them are interoperable, you'd have the scenario that we kind of have with the, I'll call it like the home IoT landscape today, where you've got maybe your Alexa device, and that can only interact with a small selection of different smart devices, or you have your like Apple HomePod, or you have your Google Home, and all of them can only interact with several, a subset of all the potential smart home devices. And part of that has been because those groups have been so focused on, well, like I just want to build my hub and not, only support the devices that I want to support, or that, do the work to support me. And so, not to dive too deep into the home IoT situation, but it is a bit of a mess compared to like the Bluetooth situation, because there isn't that overarching SIG group that is making sure everyone is following the standards. So, from an RF perspective, the way, just to quickly explain how RF works without diving too deep into it, uh, RF is radio waves. Technically,
Mhm.
like light is a radio wave, and there's different wavelengths that happen. And RF in the 2.4 gigahertz band, one way to kind of think about it is light that we can't see at different wavelengths. And so you take digital data. So this is like 0 and 1 bits that your computer generates. Say it's
Sure.
an audio stream. You then have to encode or modulate those bits into an analog signal, which is the RF signal. So you can think of
Mhm.
it again as light waves or sound waves, or in this case, radio waves. And so there are different ways that you can turn bits into waves, and then you have to, once it is received by the other device, you have to do the opposite. You have to go from the waves back into bits. So there's kind of a modulation step and a
Mhm.
demodulation step. And again, as part of traditional Bluetooth, how fast is that bit stream? So you may be, for a video stream, you may be operating at millions of bits per second, because you're shoving a lot of information in all at once. For a beacon device, you probably are transmitting at, thousands or hundreds of thousands of bits per second, because you're transmitting a much smaller amount of information. Um, so that really is all defined as part of the standard, which is how do you go from bits to radio waves back
Right.
down to bits in a way that everything along the chain can understand it.
Right.
And then that's really ultimately what Bluetooth is. It is a way to think about, how do I take bits, how do I turn them into radio waves, and then how do I have any random manufacturer that follows my standard be able to decode those bits without having to do any specific special work, for any individual device. And
Mhm.
that essentially, in a nutshell, is what's Bluetooth. And again, it is great technology because it is so ubiquitous. I mean, it's pretty much nowadays hard to find an electronics device that does not have some form of Bluetooth embedded in it.
Mhm. Mhm. And continuing right off that, because it's a beautiful segue. So obviously, bits to wavelengths to bits, and in your case, and what you're thinking about, and at Hubble and what you've been developing, and I've sort of seen this analogy, sort of if my cell phone is shouting, my Bluetooth is whispering, and you really had to create the entire chain of events and create new technologies and concepts to ultimately, as they say, hear a whisper from several hundred kilometers up there. And to do this, and again, Alex, I want you to take your time and delve into this from any angle that you want. I'm really interested in hearing, but everything from special receivers that can pick up those weaker signals, process them, amplify them. I read about you had to think about things like Doppler correction and exactly where the satellite's going to be at a specific point in time. What if two satellites are picking up the same Bluetooth signal? A lot of stuff you had to think about basically and create the magic that Hubble is. Take your time with this one and sort of walk us to a lot of what you had to develop in terms of novel software, novel technologies, and ultimately what you've done here, because it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, thank you. And certainly Ben gets most of the credit, but I get to talk about it. But at a high level, you alluded to an analogy that I'd like to use for a second. And, unfortunately, no analogy is perfect. So I'll dive into deeper parts of how the RF works once the analogy starts to break down a little bit. But I think it's helpful to start from an intuitive place and then dive in deeper from there. So traditional cellular and satellite technology, especially as you look at some of these newer like satellite networks that are trying to come up, the direct to cell kind of networks, whether it's Starlink or Skylo or some of these other ones. Essentially, there's a couple different ways that you can solve the hard RF problem of how do you get heard over hundreds of kilometers away. And the traditional kind of cellular and satellite solution to that is to yell as loud as possible.
Okay.
So, from an analogy standpoint, if you're in a crowded room and you're trying to talk to your friend across the crowded room, one solution you could do is you could essentially yell as loud as possible. And that actually is somewhat effective. Your friend across the room can hear you yelling. Where it sort of breaks down and isn't as effective of a solution is, first of all, on yourself, it's very hard to yell. Your voice gets hoarse. You expend a lot of energy. You can only do it for a relatively short amount of time before you need to take a break and probably go get some water. But it is effective so that your friend can hear you across the room, assuming you're the only one yelling. If all of a sudden everyone's kind of also yelling at the same time as you, it then quickly becomes hard for your friend to hear you as well. And that's why existing kind of cellular and satellite networks have been pretty expensive, but also very power consuming. So essentially, if you look at the existing like Globalstar and Iridium networks, they are able to get global coverage, but they require huge amounts of expense because they have relatively low capacity. They can only support a certain number of devices on their network. But on top of that, they consume a massive amount of power. And that means operationally, you either have to be like switching out batteries or adding solar cells or shoving in massive batteries. And when
Mm-hmm.
you think about all the cool new technology that's happening where your iPhone and your Android phone can be connected to these, global satellite networks, the thing that most consumers kind of miss is that it is very power battery draining. And, when you're looking at a cell phone that has a huge battery that you're recharging on a daily basis, hey, if you're a lost hiker, you'd rather have that satellite connectivity, even if your phone is going to die quicker,
Yeah.
because hopefully it gets you the help that you need. But when you think about an IoT sensor, say, tracking collar for cattle or, tool tracking for construction or well monitoring for oil and gas, these are devices that you want to put out in the field and have them last for years on a single coin cell battery.
Mm-hmm.
And so we took a look at like how the existing solutions worked and realized that they were very low capacity solutions, but also very high cost and battery life, or very low battery life, very high power consumption. So those were definitely part of what we wanted to focus on when we built Hubble and make part of the solution.
Hmm.
So going back to our analogy, you're at the other side of the room trying to talk to your friend. Rather than yell at him, we have you whisper still.
Hmm.
So we have you, output at a very low power level. But instead, what we do is we have you talk very slowly. So very similar to how I was describing Bluetooth, you can change how quickly you're sending bits across these radio waves.
Hmm.
And the slower you communicate these bits, the more like RF energy goes into every single bit. And you can massively extend range by talking slower. So we have you talk slower.
Hmm.
We change the way we do modulation. So traditional Bluetooth modulation is focused on how do I get as many bits as possible into every single radio wave, essentially. We instead are doing what is known as orthogonal modulation, which essentially encodes the information in a way that it's much easier to understand at much longer ranges. So there's different ways that you can change the bits into RF. Some are more efficient at encoding more bits, others are more efficient at longer range. So we go with one that is longer range. From an analogy standpoint, this is essentially like pronouncing and enunciating your words very, very slowly and very, very crisply so that every single word is much easier to understand. And then we do things like add error correcting codes. And this is, pretty traditional in satellite communication because you do have things like different radio waves could degrade or attenuate in the atmosphere. So you want to be able to correct for errors. From an analogy standpoint, it's essentially like repeating yourself. So, if you repeat yourself, then even if one of your sentences gets garbled, you'll be able to construct it from your second sentence, so to speak. So that's all we have you do on your side. And you're able to whisper very slowly, very crisply, and duplicate your sentences. But then we sort of effectively cheat a little bit by giving your friend hundreds of microphones on his side that are all doing very advanced kind of signal processing and beamforming to tune all of those microphones directly onto your whisper. And why this is an effective system is first of all, it's very low drain on you. You're just whispering and talking in a normal whisper voice. So you don't have to worry about power consumption, and it's actually orders of magnitude better power consumption. But then on top of that, the microphones are kind of directly beam forming on your location. And so it
Okay.
doesn't matter what the rest of the room is doing. The rest of the room can be yelling. We can still basically focus where we're listening for the RF signal and effectively pull that RF signal above the noise floor to be able to hear your whisper very particularly. And that's essentially what we do at Hubble. We've created a software package that can go on any Bluetooth chip. The software changes how we do the modulation. It changes how we, do error correcting codes. But then the major innovation in IP of Hubble is actually what's on our satellites. And
Okay.
so our satellites have literally hundreds of 2.4 gigahertz antennas and a very, very beefy FPGA computer on it that's doing, simultaneously creating hundreds of these spot beams that you can think of as basically magnifying glasses on the surface of the Earth, magnifying kind of the radio waves that we're hearing. And the beam forming that we're able to do with those hundreds of antennas actually means that we have the same link margin, which is how you measure how strong the signal is,
Hmm.
as the GPS system. So anywhere you could get a GPS lock, say you had a smartphone that could get a GPS lock, it could send a Hubble packet as well. So, you know, it's not just about outdoor satellite use. It can actually work indoors in a variety of scenarios. It can work, with some tree coverage and all that sort of stuff. So, again, from an intuition standpoint, we have essentially the same receive sensitivity as your phone does to the GPS system. And
Hmm.
if your phone can get a GPS lock, it can send a Hubble packet very easily.
Hmm. And actually, while we're on that topic, can you just talk a little bit about? I mean, you talk about all the antennas, but the release you did a couple of months ago in July about the Constellation talked about a sort of initial plan for 60 of these CubeSats, sort of in the initial by 2028, each one about 25 kilograms or so. Could you just talk a little bit about what it means to put a constellation of these up there, and just a little bit of sort of the plan for that, and then we'll come down to some of the consumer use cases and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And um, what's funny is I still remember when Ben showed up at my doorstep and said, "What about Bluetooth to space?" Because I had assumed, it would be ridiculously difficult to put satellites into space, and that was kind of my working model before I started Hubble. And certainly, don't get me wrong, it's still very hard, and lots of things can go wrong. And once you put something into space, there really isn't. There's no fixing it, especially if it's a hardware issue.
Yeah.
And so, many companies have launched essentially very expensive rocks that are now orbiting in space around us.
Yeah.
So, when we first started, as I mentioned, we wanted to validate using weather balloons to really validate that we could get the range out of the Bluetooth chip. We were successful in that. And that's what gave us the confidence to kind of raise the first rounds of funding to build the first set of satellites. So in March of last year, we launched our first two satellites. In August, we launched our third of last year. And then in June of this year, 2025, we just launched four more.
Mm.
And I'm happy to report we have a 100% success rate so far. So 7 out of 7 launched and 7 out of 7 operational, which is actually, you know, pretty untypical. Usually, part of the reason we separated them over different launches is you sometimes expect there to be failures because, again, if you get even one single thing wrong, you've essentially launched a very expensive rock into space.
Yeah.
Uh, but what I think is surprising and what your listeners might be very interested to hear is that SpaceX really has uh, revolutionized getting to space.
Yeah.
At this point, it is only slightly more complicated than ordering an Uber rideshare to get to space. So essentially, even SpaceX has a web form where you can go, there's kind of standard slots that all of these satellites fit in, especially if you're looking at building CubeSats or one of the standard form factors. And you essentially have to give SpaceX the dimensions and the mass and some confidence that you've tested it well enough to survive the vibrations and, impact of literally being attached to a controlled explosion. But assuming you can convince SpaceX of all that, it's essentially, somewhere on the order of $6,000 per kilogram. And effectively, you just take, the mass of your satellite, multiply it by whatever the current market price is set by SpaceX, and that's the cost of getting up to space. From a regulatory standpoint, assuming you're launching with SpaceX in the US, the FCC is kind of the main regulatory body that you have to register with, and
Right.
convince them that you're not going to create more space junk and that you have a deorbiting plan,
Hmm.
and that it's the FCC, so they primarily care about radio waves, and so they also want to know that you're not going to mess up with the radio waves in space or here on the surface of the Earth. But assuming you can convince the FCC of that, you can get a license to operate your satellite relatively easily. Obviously, there's a lot more steps to all this, so it's both as hard as you may imagine it to be, but also significantly easier than you think it is.
Right.
And there's a lot of people now trying to compete with SpaceX. SpaceX is certainly focusing quite a bit on Starship, which can hold significantly even more mass at a cheaper price point. But there are also other people like Firefly, Stoke Space, Rocket Lab, Blue Origin. There's a lot of people that are also trying to create additional launcher programs and rockets. And for a company like Hubble, that's just very, very exciting news because competition is only good in my mind in terms of not having SpaceX be kind of the only reliable launcher to space, which is sort of the scenario we're in today.
Hmm.
So that's a bit about the process. SpaceX kind of has the ability to buy dedicated rockets, which makes sense if you're trying to get huge amounts of mass up. But generally speaking, most of the younger companies and startups are going up on their rideshare program. So SpaceX has anywhere from 3 to 4 ride shares per year, essentially one per quarter, roughly speaking, where literally anyone can go to the website and reserve their space and pay for it and get their satellite launched relatively easily.
Awesome. Awesome. So, just to sum again, for the audience, global coverage, don't need cellular, don't need Wi-Fi around, battery life advantages, no special hardware. We got billions of Bluetooth chips out there already. Um, Take us now into some, I mean, you mentioned some of, the potential sort of early use cases for both consumers and, companies, obviously from the luggage trackers, the pet collars, adventure travel. I could be in the middle of the Appalachian Trail. I can be in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, whatever. I read about this one. The whole area of logistics and package tracking. You always get that signal from FedEx or UPS that my package is somewhere between California and New York, and I love to know
Yeah.
where somewhere. Take us to some of the short term opportunities that you see for both consumers as well as obviously there's tons of potential partners out for you that are there in the industrial logistics chain of events that no doubt would be dying to tap into what you're doing here. But again, walk us through what you're currently doing, deals you can talk about, and then obviously, bring back to the consumer as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's why I'm so excited about Hubble and wake up every day just eager to go tackle the world with Hubble is I see the opportunity to one day connect billions of devices to our network.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's been and I mean, for some of your readers that are interested in networks and IoT in general, IoT has been kind of this Internet of Things, to
Yeah.
spell it out a little bit more, has been this promising technology for a few decades at this point, where there is the idea if you could understand where everything in the supply chain is, or where all of your assets are, things like loss and stolen packages and you know automation and AI, there's all this cool technology that can be built on top of Internet of Things. And when you look in the consumer space, Internet of Things is very fragmented. And as I kind of mentioned before, talking about Bluetooth, you've got your Apple HomePods, you've got your Google Homes, you've got your Alexa devices, and they all basically don't work with each other.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and that's what's held IoT back for consumers. But what's really held IoT back in what I'll call enterprise and industrial IoT is not these different hubs trying to fight with each other. It is the fact that there is no network that enables you to gather all of this data and then build smart applications on top of it. And that's really the opportunity we see at Hubble, is
Mm-hmm.
actually creating that network layer that finally allows you to look at your assets or understand your supply chain or gather the information, necessary sensor information you need to make sure your crops don't go bad, or you're doing automated farming and
Yeah.
everything is working well. Uh, and what's interesting about industrial and enterprise IoT is that the customers we're talking to, they don't have thousands of assets they want to keep track of, or even millions. Some of them have tens or hundreds of millions of assets and sensors and different use cases that they want to solve. And that's really the insight that we believe at Hubble, is by focusing in on the unit economics so that we can scale to tens or hundreds of millions of devices for some of our customers, and doing it in a way that is very power efficient so that you only have to, say, attach the asset tag once in the lifetime of that asset and not have to worry with the of operational efficiency of like replacing batteries on a yearly basis. That's really what has kept IoT from really taking hold in the enterprise and industrial markets.
Hmm.
And that's what we're really focused on. So, talking about to finally get to your question a little bit, to talk about some of the use cases we see, in supply chain and logistics, knowing where containers are and being able to, find containers that fall off of container ships or, unfortunately get stolen at the docks.
Hmm.
But not just containers, individual pallets as well. There are companies that build hundreds of millions of pallets and lease them out all around the world. Those companies lose lots of money by underutilization and then leakage, lost and stolen pallets that they have to replace. And they, literally, some of these companies spend billions of dollars a year replacing lost and stolen pallets or losing from underutilization. So, supply chain and logistics is one area we've gone very deep in where we have a lot of our initial customer base coming from. I would say also in construction, so things like tool rentals, construction site monitoring, job site monitoring, lots of interest there. Again, a huge problem with lots of tools all over the place, often either getting misplaced or just outright stolen, is actually a huge issue. And even tracking supplies and making sure that the entire kind of supply chain of where the wood is coming from or the sheets and all that is a big problem. In agriculture, there's some livestock and cattle tracking solutions that people
Hmm.
are looking to build. Especially, here in North America, there's quite huge ranches, but also in places like um, South America, especially Brazil, Australia, even Indonesia. There's huge huge amounts of livestock that are essentially on unfenced farms and ranches that
Hmm.
cause either huge amounts of property damage or in Brazil actually are a big cause of the deforestation of the rainforest because they're grazing on the newly rebuilding rainforest and not allowing it to kind of regrow. And I'm sure you've seen at some point the articles about McDonald's buying black market beef from some of these
Yep.
Brazil cow farmers. And so there's a huge push to just literally understand where does your food come from and has it been sustainably grown, and solutions like Hubble can help with that. On the NGO front, working with various different potentially charities and NGOs where they do donate huge amounts of food to countries that are either going through a natural disaster or just need relief or whatever it may be. And often those countries may not have the best or most honest leadership. And so a lot of those supplies end up not making it to the intended recipients. And so we've seen quite a few use cases along those lines. Going back to my initial founding of Life 360, everything does eventually tie back together, but helping during natural disasters, being able to detect wildfires, as they're happening in real time and hopefully get the firefighters out there, but also help people, make sure that their family members are safe. And if they happen to get displaced from each other, being able to find each other even in low cellular connectivity areas. Lots of use cases we're finding in kind of oil and gas and utilities as well. Just being able to, know, are my wells still producing? Is there any leaks happening? Any issues that I should know? And how full are the various different propane and natural gas tanks?
Hmm.
So lots of interesting use cases there. And I hear one of the funnest parts of the job is hear new use cases on a daily basis that I'm not even smart enough to think about. And I think that's what excites me most about Hubble is these are some of the really obvious use cases, but I think there's going to be so many cool use cases that we don't even imagine. Even to some of your audience in the life sciences, lots of interesting use cases in
Yeah.
helping medical tech get better, being able to monitor medical tech and things like pacemakers better, like lots of potentially long-term interesting applications when you can have this ubiquitous network that is very low power, what can you build with it?
Mm.
Even tracking of pharmaceuticals as they move through the supply chain, and being able to do proper cold chain monitoring to make sure that, the vaccines or whatever it may be, the medicine that shows up has been at the right temperature for the entire, lifetime of that medicine.
Mhm.
So those are some of the other cool use cases that, again, Hubble isn't focused on today, but essentially any engineer or developer that has built a hardware device that has Bluetooth in it can take our software and start testing Hubble tomorrow.
Yep. Yeah, that's a. I'm glad you brought that one up because yeah, for our audience, one of the sort of a hybrid or subset of the Internet of Things is this Internet of Medical Things, as you're talking about. You brought up cold chain and asset tracking in that sense, but one of the really hot areas, I think, yeah, obviously it's not short term for you, but because a lot of our sort of our pharma guests are very interested in this as we move into not just remote patient monitoring, but so-called distributed clinical trials and how we get a $5 billion clinical trial down to something a little more manageable, doing it distributed, doing it sort of healthcare in the home, and having something like your capabilities always connected, always on to monitor not just the medicines, but hey, is this patient's blood pressure down versus this and so forth, blood levels and all that. I think the whole whatever healthcare Internet of Things, Internet of Medical Things is going to be really hot, and it's going to be exciting to see ultimately, based on discussions we have about this on the show, where Hubble takes this. But I'm kind of excited for you in that particular segment. Um, Alex, what else is coming up that we should know about? Obviously, a lot of launches, a lot of technology being developed, a lot of use cases. What else is happening for 2025 that we should know about while we have you today as we get into 2026, and then any other public facing news that we can hear about while we have you today,
Yeah,
please?
yeah, absolutely. Well, kind of fun to be, you're the first that I'm telling this to,
A
but
scoop. I
you
love
know,
scoops.
yeah. One of the cool things is we just completed a $70 million Series B. So Hubble is
Nice.
now $100 million in total venture funding. Obviously, as I mentioned, it's getting easier to send satellites up to space, but it's not free. And so this round of funding allows us to continue to go down the path of launching more and more satellites to eventually get to that full 60 satellite constellation. And one of the things I just realized I neglected to chat about before, but one of the great things about Hubble is we're already a global constellation. So every part of the Earth will have a Hubble satellite overhead every few hours or so. And as we launch more satellites, we actually don't get more coverage, but what we do is reduce the time between flybys. So how often is there a Hubble
Okay.
satellite overhead?
Sure.
The reason we want to get to 60 satellites is that essentially provides us with continuous coverage where there's essentially always a Hubble satellite over every part of the Earth. And that's really where that goal of 60 comes from. And so, this new fundraise that we're doing allows us to keep executing as fast as possible towards that 3-year mission to get all 60 up from the seven we are today. So, very excited to have a very awesome group of investors. The founder of DocuSign, the founder of Tile, just joined us as investors. Ryan Swagger, who's the lead, he was actually the Series A board member of Life 360, so I've worked with him for many, many years at this point. He's had a whole bunch of huge deep tech and crypto wins, and has been a very supportive investor. Mark Weiser of RPM. So lots of great investors joining this round that all believe in the vision that we have to, bring satellite global connectivity to Bluetooth everywhere.
Awesome. Awesome. And one last thing, I know you get out there a lot and sort of on the conference circuit. I know you were at the Space Symposia back in April, and there's another one coming up in 2026. Other sort of public facing initiatives that where we might find you along the way and run into you, meet you. Anything else on that particular side of things? 'Cause I'm sure a lot of people want to run into you and discuss use cases.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I'm Alex at Hubble.com, so feel free to always reach out over email. But outside of that, I have been more focused on the the space conferences to date, because a big focus of the early part of the company was getting into space and proving that we could. Now that we have the playbook for getting into space, it's all about really scaling the constellation, but really talking to customers, understanding their use cases, and seeing how Hubble can help. And so starting to spend a lot more of my time in more of the kind of industrial conferences, mostly supply chain and logistics focused, which, if any of your customers happen to be at any of those expos, happy to have them chat with me. So definitely moving more towards the industry and enterprise kind of expos now, just to learn what's out in market and how we can help.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, no, really, really exciting story. Again, I enjoyed reading about it to start with, and I promise you, I try to get up to speed as best possible to hang with you, but I really enjoy listening to you, enjoying hearing about the technology and what you're building, and I look forward to continue to follow it and hopefully be a customer one day. And again, for everybody out there that's going to be listening to this episode, you've been spending time with Alex Haro, co-founder, chief executive officer, executive chairman, Hubble Network, building the world's first global satellite network, enabling connectivity anywhere on Earth. Alex, again, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us for a little while today about everything you're up to. Thank you for this amazing system you're building. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create science and technologies that will create a better tomorrow for all of us. So really an awesome story, and I wish you the best with it. And congratulations on on the recent raise.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it was a pleasure doing it. And yeah, thank you.
Great having you.